Morning. Today I'm doing something a little bit unusual. I have an opportunity to work with a small charity to run a bite-sized session for them on training design. So at the moment it's just at proposal stage. Definitely haven't got this work, but what I like to do in order to get the work is show how I would actually approach the situation. So I've got quite a lot of things already that I could ask them to do in advance, because obviously we're not going to be able to turn people into efficient training designers in just a couple of hours. What the situation is there's a group of people who work in L&D. They all have their own very distinct area of specialisation. So they take responsibility for training in a very specific thing, but as this charity grows, they want to be able to cross-fertilise, stand in for one another, and they're also trying to expand their market as well. So instead of just training other specialists, they actually want to start training people who are the managers of those specialists. They want to do more of a public education piece, so it's a slightly different way of training as well that they want to do. So it's a bit of a tough call, as I said, in a bite-sized session, to decide exactly what it is they want to do. So during my initial conversation, I made some notes. It was either a case of I could provide an overview of what good training looks like, but then I thought, you know what, I've got all of that recorded, so they can just watch the recordings or get the downloads, buy the book. So do they really need me to go along and run that for them? So what they wanted to do was to learn how to provide effective training that will engage people and meet learning objectives, and do that consistently across the team. They particularly want to look at how to make the content relevant and accessible, engaging and impactful, and to have that consistency. So what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to switch views. I'm going to use Terry's transform deck to try and declutter my brain a little bit and try and think how am I best going to go about approaching this, because my brain's fired off in a zillion different directions already. And I just need to start bringing some sort of focus into this, bearing in mind the restrictions that we have. So I'm just going to basically show my workings in the margin, let you see how my brain works, remind myself that it does actually work, and see what we come up with. So I'll catch you when I've got the transform deck up and running. Now, just in case you are not familiar with this transform deck, I have my set here. Beautiful, lovely things, which you can actually get via the website. So if you just look down on our resources page, you can see all the different resources that we have. Even if you're not a VIP member, there's still quite a lot that you can get. So if we just scroll down to here, you can click Buy Now. That takes you straight through to the options to buy the deck, and you can see there a bit of a clearer picture. And I've got this one here, this Transform Toolkit, which enables me to have this digital mini deck. It's worth the extra 20 quid, to be honest, especially if you're collaborating with other people. It's lovely to have these in front of you, because these have a lot more detail on them than the digital mini deck. But they're great memory joggers, so that's what I'll be using when I think out loud and show you where my brain is going. So here is that digital mini deck laid out on a Jamboard, so I can see what I've got ahead of me. And I've already been through the physical cards. Now that's what I prefer to do. I like to get them all laid out, and I like to touch them and move them around. And I have identified, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cards that might be helpful to me. So I'm going to pull those out. And here are those 11 cards. Now, obviously, in a bite-sized session, I'm not going to be able to do all of these things, but so what I need to do now is start to think about which of them are going to help me shape my session. And having thought about it for quite a while, I always say with a bite-sized session, You can either do an overview, so it's like a T shape. You can either do an overview of a topic or you can do one thing in detail. And given that we can do the overview by other means, I really think what I've decided to focus on, what I'm going to put in the proposal, is focusing what the end user wants. So whether that's the person receiving the training, whether it's the facilitator, if it's not the designer, or the stakeholder. So I'm really going to get us to think about that a little bit. And then how can we translate that into deliverables? So we're going to be looking very much at teasing out what good looks like in this session and sharing good practice between the people who are there. So I'm thinking it's going to be quite workshoppy rather than presentation led is my view. So let's have a look at all these different things with that in mind. If that's the way that I want to do, one that's immediately jumping out as being helpful is going to be this critique and example. So we can actually get people to bring in examples of what they think good looks like, or even what they think bad looks like. So that is perhaps something that would be a really practical way to start the session. We could potentially, my emails, could potentially do this amplify and reduce. So this is where we let learners explore what would happen if variables were amplified or reduced. So that fits in some ways, it fits quite nicely with this critique and example. So if we say, well, what do we like about this, or what don't we like about this? What if we did more of that? What if we took that out completely? How would that alter things? It could also be done towards the end of a session when we've decided perhaps on some best practice. Let's just have a look at the ranking one. So learners rank a selection of items in order of a given criteria. I can see that being useful in terms of, what good looks like, what's important to us, what do we need. So that might actually be something for them to do in advance, just to have a quick brainstorm and then start prioritising what's important to them, because I appreciate I'm coming from a certain background, so what's important to me or what's important in a corporate setting might not be what's relevant to them. So I can see that having value, but I don't know if that would kind of be an icing on the cake, I think, rather than a core driver for a session. Where else are we going? Storytelling. Storytelling. Let's have a look what that one is all about. Probably quite self-explanatory. Lost the storytelling one. So storytelling is just exactly what it says on the tin, I suppose. Let's tell a tale. Maybe from the trainer's perspective about when they had to cover something and they didn't know what to do, how that felt, what would have made it easier. So that might actually fit in a little bit with this critique and example. So we've got the actual examples there, and the storytelling. So the critique and example is kind of the brain side, the facts, the figures. Let's look at what we've actually got, and the storytelling is the implications of that, maybe. What made it good, what made it bad. So that's something that's definitely worth considering. Let's have a look at Map a Journey, because that one actually jumped out at me straight away. Learners map out a journey to explore and how it works in practice. Now, if this team are looking to standardise the way they design training, if they want to come up with what good looks like, they're going to have to decide on their own good practice. So that, I think, is something that will definitely be useful to them, or what is going to be our approach to designing great training. And immediately that links in with creating a cheat sheet, where we could get them to at least start in the session creating their own checklist. So this is what we expect as a minimum. This is the deliverables that we expect. This is a standard that we can all follow and we've created ourselves, because we all know that when we create something ourselves, it's much more meaningful. It's the whole IKEA effect. So I definitely see these green ones being part of the solution. The challenge that I have is time, of course. Let's just look at some of these others that jumped out at me. I think storyboarding and storytelling and create a board, they're all quite similar, aren't they? They're all about visualizing what good looks like. Whether we do that just in a quite random fashion, whether we do that verbally, or whether we actually try and organise that information, which again would link into this map a journey. So I'm starting to see some things come together here. And I'm jumping about here because this is how my brain works. I told you, I'm just showing you how my brain works. So build the best version is, again, it links to all of these things over here, doesn't it? It's that critiquing the example, it's the amplifying and reducing, it's the mapping a journey. Let's just see what it says on the card. Learners compete to build the best version of something. So that would be great, actually, if we had a larger group. I think there's only going to be 7 or 8 people, but in a larger group, that would be fantastic. Because what we could then do is almost do a 1, 2, 4 all exercise on that. So you've all come up with your own version of what good looks like. So let's work together now to actually pick out the very best, create the greatest hits album, and how that will enable us to move forward as a team and create great training for our facilitators, for our end users, and for our clients. Excuse me, I'll have a cup of tea. So already my brain is kicking off and I already need about half a day. Let's have a look at some of these other things that I've got down here. Now, pre-mortem is learners imagine that something has gone wrong and review why. I'm going to put that up here with this sort of storytelling storyboard, because it's just another way of thinking about what's important, isn't it? So if we say you had to stand in for Tom, Tom normally runs this course, but you've had to stand in for him because, you know, for whatever reason Tom can't make it, and everything goes wrong. Tell us what goes wrong and why it goes wrong. And then we can perhaps unpick that and say, well, how could we have prevented this? Or at least reduce the impact of it. You know, we've got to be realistic. We're not going to be able to foresee every potential problem, but that might be, again, a really useful exercise. I'm going to have a look at the branching paths. So learners navigate a scenario stage by stage with choices in each. That's quite interesting. So as we are mapping the journey, maybe, we can then say, so we've all agreed what we need to do at the start is this. Then where would we go? Would you then create that, or would you create the other? If we did this first, what would happen? If we did that first, what would happen? How might that change our approach to design? I don't think that's exactly what this card means, but that's the thought that it sparked in relation to this specific challenge. So that, I think if you're coming up with a brand new process, if you're wanting people to think something through, that could be useful there. It's looking like applying stages might link to that in some way, so let's have a look. Applying stages. Learners apply a tool or technique in stages, reviewing after each. I guess, actually, that's kind of how I read the branching paths scenario. So let's work on it stage by stage. So I'm actually going to move that branching paths one out there, and think that's perhaps more relevant to the way that I'm going with the design of this session. And then, of course, the action planning, which is very much tied into creating that cheat sheet, because in that session we aren't going to get everything done, no chance. So what we need to do is make a start on some of these things, and then as the action plan is perhaps allocate who's going to do what, when they're going to do it by, and what their own review mechanism is going to be. So having thought out loud about some of these things, I've decided that I'm probably, with hindsight, not going to use ranking and branching paths. Interesting concepts, but given the time scale, given what we need to achieve, I'm putting them to one side. And then what we have got is 2 very real phases to this. So we have put these down here, and these, although I've got sort of 3 groups, these do kind of go together in the let's define, let's use our own experience, let's think about our own experience as trainers and also what our end users want. What are they looking for? And let's define that as best we can. And we can do that from a position of imagination over here with these 4, or we can do that from a position of reviewing past experience. So I think I just need to decide which approach is going to be best, because whichever approach we take, that will give us lots of raw material which we can then use to map a journey, probably in stages, and do that at quite a top line, and ask people to create a cheat sheet stroke standard operating procedure stroke how-to guide, and leave them with some very clear actions. So that is the next stage in my thinking. I'm going to go away and develop those ideas and then come back to you when I'm a little bit further along the way. Okay, so it's about an hour and a half later, and I've had a first stab at a draft. I am going to sleep on it because I haven't managed to fit everything in that I wanted to. The session is way too short for that, so I just, what I like to do is get a starter for 10 down on paper, and then I'll step away from it, and then I'll come back to it probably tomorrow before I send the proposal out. So this is where I've got to anyway. So I've got my aim and my objectives in there, which, you know, if you've done any of my courses, you know, I think are really important. So the aim is, what is it we're going to be able to do? It's to, I might need to refine this because in 90 minutes we're not going to achieve it, but it's not just 90 minutes, of course, because there is this independent work here. So actually they're going to be doing 2 to 3 hours before they meet me as a minimum. And then they will be following up again with another couple of hours. So actually we probably are looking at a day. Even with a day, it's probably quite ambitious. So the aim is for them to be able to take a consistent approach to designing engaging and impactful training to allow them to become more flexible as a team and grow the business. So that's the what's in it for me. And the objectives, as you can see, is to follow a process to identify in specific terms what each stakeholder wants from training. That is something that was mentioned to me in the initial conversation. I'm not convinced I'm meeting that one, to be totally honest, which is why I want to reflect and think if I can tighten up my thinking a little bit. Define what good looks like for each group of stakeholders. I've got that covered. And to create a checklist to follow create a checklist to follow for training design that will ensure training is designed to the standards agreed. They're going to start that, and that's what the after bit is going to be. They're going to continue that once I can see that they're on the right lines. So this first bit, not sure we're there yet, but you can see I've created my outline. I've specified what I'd need them to do. I've also explained here what else I would do in preparation. So I would want to find out a little bit more about the delegates themselves, just to find out what their experience is in terms of training, and in particular in designing training and researching training and all that consultancy. And possibly, because I've got a few ideas in my head for the exercises, I might ask them to bring in samples, let's just change that, of training materials for review. So you can see here, so very brief intro, we haven't got long, they all know each other, they will have seen me on the online courses, so we're not going to spend long on that, but this is the whole mindset piece. This is why we need, you're already good, and I have every reason to believe that they are, but why we need to take it up a level in the approach to training design, and that's linking back to the business goals really, and of course their own career development. So we've got that mindset in there. Very quickly to get them to think about who the training is for, because if they've only ever delivered for themselves and a specific audience before, they've probably never thought beyond that. So I think it's worthwhile just doing that and thinking about, hey, as this business grows, we've got more people to consider now. And then we're going to go into the first big exercise to look at what good looks like from three different perspectives in particular. And then what we need to follow that up with is, well, how do we give them what they need? This is what good looks like to them, what do we need to do in order to deliver that. So I've got a few ideas around that we could do. I don't put too much detail in the proposal because, as I've mentioned on all of my training courses, there's 2 stages to design. So this is very much stage 1, and even this is quite scant really because it is only in a proposal. So this is just telling them what I would hope to cover and to just give them a flavour of how I might do that. Now, if I win the work, I'll then flesh this out a little bit more and then obviously then go into the real detail for crafting the exact case studies that I might use up here, the exact questions that I'm going to ask. I'll assign timings. So it's very much a 3-stage process really, although I always say it's 2. So that's going to be the meat of the session, there, getting them to define it, and then we need to start what happens next. So you've said what you're going to do. Obviously in 90 minutes we're not going to do that. So, but what I do want them to do is to go away with very clear plans with responsibilities and dates, so to make them accountable for what they need to look into more, what they're going to do quite quickly, so soon after the session. What are you going to do? And then what are your longer term plans? What are you aiming for? So that is something that they're going to have to go away and do on their own. And just looking here to follow a process to identifying specific terms, they did mention that they wanted to look at how do we define exactly what each stakeholder wants. So that is perhaps something that I need to squeeze in somewhere. But given the time, this is already tight, so it's how do we do that. The other options, of course, I can do a webinar in advance. I could do another pre-recorded session. I could just create a pre-course pack and get them to do their own research. So there are lots of different ways I could approach that, but that's something I'm going to think on. And then this will go into my proposal. It's not going to be a huge proposal. It's going to be 3 or 4 pages long. That's going to identify, obviously, and specify the costs associated with this and the timescales and when it will all be delivered. So that's where I am up to. If I define it further, I will let them know, let you know, sorry. But for now, you can see how I've gone from vague brief to and a brief conversation through using the transform deck to coming up with a short outline that I can present to the potential client in a proposal. So let me know what you think of my weird and wonderful approach, and I hope it was useful. Have a great day. Bye.